Hey guys, Jotter here. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I quite like vehicles in Enlisted. Quite a few of these are some of my favourites, and I do like using these. However, I know for a fact that some of these vehicles are very difficult to use. Some of these require a lot more skill to use than others, some not so much. So, that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be ranking every Allied and Axis vehicle in Normandy. I should have said every Normandy vehicle. Not the premiums, because I don't really have too much experience with them. And let's face it, some of these are, basically I'm just going to be ranking all of them from basically how much skill is required for them. So basically, most skillless to least skillless vehicle. Now, this will revolve around how easy and / hard they are to take out. How easy it is to use them effectively, how maneuverable they are. This is almost every factor that you can think of. And mostly, their armor and stuff. So, yeah. We'll start with, what I think is the least skill-based vehicle. So, the vehicle that takes the least amount of skill to use. And then we'll go over to what I think takes the most amount of skill. Anyways, let us begin with what I think is the most skillless vehicle in Normandy. Coming in at dead last as the most skillless, in my opinion, has to be the Panther A. Now, you might be like, but you think the Tiger's better than the Panther A. Why are you putting the Panther A as the most skillless? Well, the Tiger actually requires some skill with maneuverability. You see, the Tiger A is a massive target for anything. You see a Tiger, immediately you're going to get hit by a P-47, a P-38, and two 76s. With a Panther, you can be a little bit more nimble with it. It's a lot harder to distinguish between a Panther and a Tiger sometimes. Yeah, the Panther skin obviously exists, and obviously people will recognise a Panther from a Tiger and a Panther from a Panzer IV immediately, but there's going to be a lot... But it's a lot easier to use a Panther than a Tiger, in my opinion. It's also a lot quicker, a lot more maneuverable, so it's a lot easier to avoid bombs and, stuff like this. And more on top of this, it's got just as good armor. A worse gun, yes, but it's more maneuverable with pretty much equivalent armor. It's faster. It's a lot easier to go around the map than it is in the Tiger. In the Tiger, in some maps, in some maps, the Panther is better than the Tiger. For example, in D-Day, the Tiger, trying to get that thing onto the beach is a fucking nightmare. Whereas with the Panther, you can just go through the gates. By the way, that's even with the whole change. Like, you have to blow up the walls and stuff for the Tiger. Whereas with the Panther, you can just literally just go straight through the already open gates. Which, I think, yeah. Anyways, that being said, let's move on to number 11. Coming in at number 11, it's everyone was expecting this. It's the Jumbo. I mean, just look at this. It's got pretty much, you can see here, 76mm armor plus 30 plus another 100 here. Like, it is unbelievably it is very tough to take out the Jumbo. Like, I mean, it is very tough to take out a Jumbo with this thing. Like, especially frontally. Now, it is possible to kill it frontally. I've killed them frontally. There is multiple weak spots with this thing. But for an average noob, for an average player, there was a reason why this thing was considered so hated. Let's just say that. There was a reason why people were like, oh, Axis suffers because of the Jumbo. The Jumbo is a very nasty vehicle to go up against. It has weaknesses, don't get me wrong, it does have weaknesses. But, my god, the Jumbo's, some of its strengths are just, like, it's got basically a shitload of armor, so it's really hard to take out the turret. It's very hard to take out it's basically very hard to pen, especially from the front. And I would say it's just very skillless. It's a very skillless vehicle. In fact, what pretty much the most well-known, grey zone camping vehicle is the Jumbo. There's a reason why people literally say that the Jumbos are the most skillless vehicle in the game. And I mean, if you want even more proof of this, this thing has a premium squad version as well, which is just as bad. Anyways, let's move on to number 10. Coming in at number 10 is the Sherman, specifically the 76mm Sherman. Now, the reason this is at number 10 is mostly because of the gun, but honestly, there really isn't much. And like, I would say number 10 to number 8 can go in any order, really. So, yeah, the 76, not really much to say about this. It's a 76mm gun, and yeah, it's got some good armor. But the thing is, it's nowhere near as skillless as the Jumbo or the Panther, which obviously have, which are pretty much mostly unbeat. They've got lots of good stuff going for them, and barely anything that holds them back. This kind of does. Its armor isn't the best, like, especially compared to the Jumbo and the Panther, and its speed isn't that good as well. And it's just more like, it's a more rounded tank, to be honest. It's more rounded than the Jumbo. It's more rounded than the Panther, which is why it's coming in at number 10. The only reason it's anywhere above the others is because it's just got the more powerful cannon. Anyways, let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9 is, in fact, the Sherman. Now, the thing with the Sherman is, well, this is the regular Sherman, the M4A2 Sherman. The thing is, the reason why this is at number 9 is it's just so rounded. It's a really well-rounded vehicle, which is honestly kind of the same with most vehicles in the game. They're just really most medium tanks are just really well-rounded. The Sherman is probably the most well-rounded tank of the game. You can do this in any situation and it will give a good job. It's not as good as other tanks, don't get me wrong. It's not as good as something like, say, a Jumbo for taking hits. It's not as good as a 76 for dealing with tanks, but it'll do its job, and it'll do it well, which is why it's coming in at number 9. It's just a good all-rounder, really. And pretty much anyone can use it, and use it well. So, yeah. Anyways, let's move on to number 8. Coming in at number 8 is the Panzer IV-H. Now, the problem with the Panzer IV-H is it's basically the exact same as the Shermans. It's a solid medium vehicle. It's a really solid medium tank, and honestly, I think that the H version is a lot more solid than most people give it credit for. Like, this is actually a very good vehicle. The only problem is that many people, when they think of the H, they think of the J, and I think that's a bad thing, especially because the H actually has good turret traversal for a start, and also it's just a solid tank. The H is just a solid tank. I mean, I put it as ignore that. I put it at, I believe it was number. I can't remember where I put it, but I keep putting this as like quite high, like top 5 in Normandy in terms of tanks. But I would say it does take some skill to use. However, it's nowhere near as skillless as some other tanks in the game. Anyways, let's move on to the next tank. Coming in at number 7 is the big cat itself, the Tiger. Now, the problem with the Tiger is it's just, like, it's very powerful, don't get me wrong, it's unbelievably powerful, but there's 2 things that make it so, hard to use. The first one is the fact that it is a fucking nightmare to maneuver in. This thing is actually very difficult to maneuver in. It gets stuck on everything, and on some maps, you cannot get to the front lines without with much it requires some issue to get to the front lines. So you've got that. and the second part is it's so big. Its size is so big that it's very easy to distinguish from the air. So you've got, I would say, the biggest threat for the Tiger is air threats, because, well, I mean, ground threats, not many tanks can beat it. The Firefly can beat it, the 76s can beat it if you've got a good 76, and obviously, if you've got a good crew, then even a Stuart can beat this. But the problem is that air targets, you don't need anything in the air, any skill in the air to beat this tank. So, yeah. That's one of the reasons why. It's kind of like, you have to be constantly on the move with this tank. You have to be constantly moving, constantly just driving around, making sure that a P-38 can't bomb you, basically. And it's honestly one of the hardest tanks to utilise because of that. However, I had to put it above other tanks because its armour and its, big gun make it some of the, one of the best tanks in the game. Anyways, let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6 is the Panzer 4J. Now, the 4J's problem is that it is just such, like, its turret speed makes it so you have to constantly position your tank. So you have to basically keyboard turn with your tank. The turret's turn speed is appalling, but that's really about it. That's the only problem with it. That's the only difference between it and the H, is that you have a different playstyle with the two. Like, the H you can use like a Sherman. This you have to use something like an M10. Like a poor man's version of an M10. Anyways, let's move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is the Panther 3N. Now, the problem with the N is it's really an infantry support vehicle. It does have some good features, like it's got some good armour. It can be a bit of a bitch to kill at times if you don't know how to kill it. But the problem with it is it's really focused against infantry, which really, you have to use it kind of like an infantry support vehicle rather than a tank, which some people realise and they use it like that, but others don't, and they don't use it like that, and then they probably complain that Axis suffers. Anyways, let's go on to number 4. Coming in at number 4, we're returning back to the Allies. It's the Stuart. Now, the thing with the Stuart is it's kind of more like, this is probably the first vehicle in the game I would actually say requires some legitimate skill to use. And the reason for this is because the Stuart is a very, very, very weak tank. And I mean a very weak tank. This thing will takes about one hit and it goes down, basically. And the reason for this is because it has barely any armour, it's got a weak cannon, and most people can't use it correctly. So, yeah, it's decent, but the thing is, you have to use it correctly. If you use it, most people don't use it correctly. Like, I've seen people try and rush into a tank, into a position, slam into the position, and think, oh, I'm so good, and then immediately eat dick when some guy throws an E-pack or fires a Faust or a tank cut shows up and destroys it quite quickly. But yeah, the Stuart is a very, very weak vehicle, but it's not the... But, again, it's really because it requires a lot of skill to use, rather than it's just god-awfully weak. Anyways, let's move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is actually the Puma. Now, the problem with the Puma is that this thing is made out of glass. Like, you can be penned anywhere on this thing. Like, I'm pretty sure, a HE round can easily kill this thing. Like, I'm just going to show off. I haven't been showing it off much. But look at this. 4mm of armour, really. At places, 4 to 8mm of armour. Yeah, you have some bit of a hole here. But at thickest, it's like 50mm on the turret. 30mm. that ain't gonna stop even a Piat. That will probably barely stop an anti-tank rifle. Oh, crap. But, yeah. That barely stops anti-tank rifles and stuff like that. So, it's undeniable that this thing is obviously going to have to be a high skill level. However, the problem is that the Puma is actually very good. It's a pretty good vehicle. I've said it multiple times that this thing is a very solid Axis vehicle, but it shouldn't be the starting vehicle because people will use it like a tank instead of an armoured car. It's very good at hunting infantry and killing, and most importantly, being kind of like an annoyance to tanks. It can kill tanks. It can kill jumbos. I've seen it kill jumbos. I've seen people kill jumbos with this thing. However, and even in most of my videos where I'm using the Puma, I've killed jumbos with this thing. However, you need to use its strengths to its advantage. Its speed. You have to constantly keep moving around with this thing. Kind of like the Stuart, like I talked about earlier. But with the Stuart, you've got a little bit more give with the armour. However, with the Puma, since you can be penned with a machine gun, yeah, you're going to have to be very careful with this. Anyways, let's move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2, we've got the M8 Scott. Now, the thing with the Scott is, it does a lot of damage, okay? The Scott is one of the best AP, has one of the best HEs in Normandy. I think the only thing I can probably say which is better in terms of, is probably the Tiger. But that's about it, really. That's all that the Scott has that's going for it. It's very light. It's probably one of the weakest vehicles in the game in terms of armor. The only thing I think which is worse is the Puma. And even then, the Puma has some good speed and maneuverability. This has some good speed and maneuverability as well. But it has one major downside. It's open-topped. If it wasn't open-topped, it would be probably around where the Panther 3 is. However, the problem is that the Scott just... It being open-topped really adds a new element because A, you've got no machine gun other than the open-topped, the top-mounted one, which even then, like, it's easy to snipe people from. B, your crew is dangerously exposed. C, someone can actually jump on the tank and destroy it. And also, you just have to really play it skillfully. You have to play it kind of like how the Americans actually designed the tank and had its use, which was round the back. You know, round the back, behind the lines, and basically more like a support weapon. However, that's kind of like really great. You know, it's pretty much a vehicle that's designed for grey zone camping, ironically. But yeah, it's very weak, and it requires a lot of skill to use, which is why it's coming in at number 2. Anyways, let's move on to number 1, which pretty much from Trial of Elimination you will know from just from the Scott being at number 2. Coming in at number 1, it's a very easy number 1. It is the M10 or the Wolverine. Now the problem with the Wolverine is, again, same problems with the Scott. It's weak. It's got weak armor. It's got no machine gun. It's open topped. Yada yada yada. You know the drill from that. It's basically the exact same as the 76 Sherman. However, it's worse in every way. It's got weaker armor. It's got a worse gun. It's got the same gun, but it's got weaker armor. It's got worse maneuverability. You can't turn the turret. You have to basically turn the tank instead, kind of like the Panzer 3J. Not Panzer 3J, Panzer 4J. Panzer 3J's also got slow turn speeds as well. But you've got, almost no turn speed on this thing, and it's bad. It's generally just bad. Yeah, that's all I gotta say about it. It's just bad, and it requires a lot of skill to use. Now, I just want to point out as well, I've seen people use every tank effectively and how it's meant to be used on multiple occasions. I cannot count on one hand how many times I've seen the M10 used correctly when it wasn't used by me. I've only seen it used correctly once. That is insane how much of a skill-based vehicle it is. most players can't even use this thing correctly. And, I mean, the way you're meant to use it is the same as Scott, behind the lines, picking off tanks. And, yeah. It's just very hard to use, which is why it's coming in at number 1. And I'm pretty sure everyone knew it was coming in at number 1. Anyways, I'm going to go end the video here. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.